Hello student, in the previous video of the chapter first history the French Revolution we discussed the events that causes for the French revolutions. In this video we will discuss the next causes. A directory rules of the France. A new constitution was introduced when the Jacobin club fell and the government led the wealthier middle class to seize the power. Then a new constitution was introduced which denied the right to vote to the non-corporate section of society. And these then appointed a directory and executive made up of 5 members. And this was meant as a safeguard against concentration of power in one hand. The directory often clashed with the legislative council, who then sought to dismiss them. The political instability of the directory paved the way to the rise of military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. The revolution and the role of women. Women were active participants in the events that brought about so many important changes in the French society. The women in the French society faced inequality. Their wages were lower than those of men. Then they started their own political clubs and newspapers to voice their interest. About 60 women clubs came in different French society. The Society of Revolutionary and Republic Women was the most famous of them. Women demanded right to vote and to be elected. But during the Reign of Terror, women's clubs were closed and their political activities were banned. Many prominent women were arrested and executed. Women's movement for voting rights and equal wages continued through the next 200 years in many countries of the world. Then finally in 1946, the women in the France won the right to vote. The evolution of the slavery. One of the most revolutionary social reform of the Jacobin Revolution was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. The slave trade began in the 17th century. The colonials in the Caribbean, Montaigu, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo were the important suppliers of the community, such as the tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. The Europeans were reluctant to go and work in distant and unfamiliar lands, so this created a shortage of labor on the plantation. And to fulfill this shortage, French merchants sailed from the posts of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast and bought slaves from local chieftains. Then port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to flourishing the slave trade. Throughout the 18th century, there was a little criticism of the slavery in France. Finally, in 1794, the convention legislated to free all slaves in the French overseas possession. But 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Slavery was finally abolished in the French colonies in 1848. Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte declared himself the ruler of France and reintroduced monarchy in France. He conquered his neighboring countries and made kingdoms, where he kept his own family members. He saw his role as a modernizer of Europe and introduced a uniform system of weight and measure that provided by the decimal system. His ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French revolutions. Inspired from these, colonized peoples reworked the idea of freedom from bondage into their movements to create a sovereign nation state. But finally, he was defeated at Waterloo in 1815. The revolutionary and everyday life. The year after 1789 saw the following change in the lives of men, women, and the children. The revolutionary government passed law that translated the ideas of liberty and equality into everyday practice. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of the censorship. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be natural right. Freedom of the press meant that opposing views of events could be expressed. Plays, songs, and festive procession attracted large number of people, and these were the only way through which people could grasp and identify with the idea of justice and liberty, as only a handful of educated people could read. Legacy of the French Revolutions. The idea of the liberty, equality, and the democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. Even in India, Tipu Sultan and Raja Ram Mohan Rai responded to the ideas coming from the revolutionary France. So in these events, the France revolutions